Here's a question nobody asks at the end of a crypto cycle. Not how much did you make, plenty of people ask that. The question nobody asks is, where did the money come from? Because in any market, for every person who walks away with a profit, someone else has to be the one who funded it. And if you're watching a video like this, if you're someone who earns a salary, pays rent, maybe has some student debt, there's a reasonable chance you already know the answer to that question. You just don't want to say it out loud yet. That's okay. Let's talk about it calmly. Meet Daniel. Daniel is 28. He lives in Chicago. He works in marketing. Decent job, nothing glamorous. After taxes, he takes home about $3,800 a month. In Chicago, that sounds like enough, until you actually look at where it goes. Rent, $450 for a one-bedroom, which is actually on the lower end for his area. Car payment and insurance, $480. Student loan minimum, $310. Groceries, utilities, subscriptions, roughly $600. And then the invisible layer, the stuff people don't count, coffees, dinners out, the occasional weekend trip, the Amazon orders that feel small individually but add up to a few hundred a month without fail. By the time Daniel does the real math, he has somewhere between $300 and $500 left over each month. Not zero, but not enough to feel like progress either. And that's the emotional space where crypto found him. Not through greed, exactly, through frustration, through the very reasonable feeling that the traditional path, save slowly, invest in index funds, wait 30 years, felt completely disconnected from the financial pressure he was dealing with right now. In 2021, his coworker turned $4,000 into $22,000 in 4 months. Daniel saw it happen in real time. He heard the story at lunch. He watched the screenshots get shared on the group chat. So he put in $6,000. Money he had spent 18 months saving. You can probably guess what happened next. Here's what nobody explained to Daniel and what the crypto content ecosystem has a financial incentive not to explain. Crypto markets, particularly in their speculative phase, function as what economists call a transfer mechanism. Money doesn't appear from nowhere. When an asset rises dramatically in value and then collapses, the gains that early holders realize have to come from somewhere. They come from the capital that entered the market later, typically during the height of media attention, when ordinary people like Daniel finally feel confident enough to participate. This isn't fraud in the legal sense, it's just how liquidity works. The people who got in early need someone to sell to. And the loudest, most enthusiastic voices in any asset boom are almost always the ones who need buyers. Daniel didn't lose his $6,000 because he was stupid. He lost it because he entered a market structured in a way that systematically disadvantages people in his exact financial position. Here's the simple math that makes this visible. A venture capital firm that invested $2 million in a crypto project at a $10 million valuation can absorb a 70% market collapse and still be fine. They're playing with institutional money, they're diversified, and they have analysts tracking exit points. When they sell, someone has to buy. Daniel bought. And when the collapse came, Daniel couldn't hold. Because his $6,000 wasn't speculative capital, it was his actual savings. Real rent money, real life money. He had no margin to wait. That is the volatility tax, and it lands almost exclusively on people without financial cushion. Now here's what makes this particularly worth understanding, because it's not about intelligence. Daniel is smart. Most people who went through this are smart. The psychological mechanism at work is something behavioral economists call FOMO, driven social proof, which sounds academic but is actually very simple. When someone in your social circle makes money, your brain doesn't process it as information about a market, it processes it as information about yourself, about your decisions, about whether you're falling behind. And that feeling is genuinely uncomfortable. Uncomfortable enough that it overrides careful thinking. The crypto ecosystem understood this perfectly. The language was designed around it. Have fun staying poor wasn't an accident. Diamond hands wasn't just a phrase, it was a social identity. If you sold, you were weak. If you were skeptical, you didn't understand the technology. The entire culture was engineered to make rational caution feel like a character flaw. And so people held through losses they should have stopped at. They put in more money to lower their average. They told themselves the recovery was coming because accepting the loss meant accepting something more painful than a financial loss. It meant accepting that they'd been wrong about something they'd publicly committed to. That psychology is the real trap. The market just holds the door open. Let's stay with Daniel for a moment longer, because the $6,000 loss is only part of the story. That $6,000 invested in a basic S&P 500 index fund in early 2021 instead would be worth roughly $8,200 to $9,000 today, depending on timing. Not spectacular, not a story anyone would tell at lunch, but it would exist. More importantly, the 18 months Daniel spent rebuilding that savings buffer were 18 months he wasn't investing at all. He was just trying to get back to zero. That opportunity cost, the compounding that didn't happen during those months, is nearly invisible, but it's real. This is the pattern financial researchers see consistently across retail investing. It's not one bad decision that defines long-term wealth outcomes. It's the recovery period after a bad decision. The months or years spent getting back to baseline while the market continues moving without you. So what does someone who navigates this more successfully actually do differently? It's less about which assets they pick and more about how they categorize money before they deploy it. Financially aware people, not wealthy people necessarily, just aware ones, tend to operate with a clear internal distinction. There's money that can genuinely disappear without changing their life, and there's money that cannot. Those two categories never get mixed, not because of rigid rules, but because they've done the honest math on their own situation, and they know exactly where the line is. For Daniel, with $300 to $500 of genuine discretionary income per month, the honest answer might have been that he had no speculative capital at all. Not because crypto is inherently wrong, but because he had no financial floor beneath him if it failed. And without a floor, you're not investing. You're just gambling with your own stability. The financially intelligent version of Daniel doesn't avoid risk because he's scared. He avoids asymmetric risk, situations where the downside is catastrophic and the upside, however real in theory, depends on timing and information he simply doesn't have access to. He builds the floor first, slowly, unglamorously. And then, only then, does anything speculative come into the picture, with money he could genuinely afford to watch go to zero. The crypto story isn't over. The technology will continue to evolve. New cycles will come. New versions of Daniel's coworker will make real money, and new versions of Daniel will fund those exits. None of that is a reason to feel cynical. It's just a reason to be clear-eyed about which role you're positioned to play and whether that role actually serves you. The uncomfortable question at the start was, where does the money come from? The honest answer, most of the time, is from people who entered with hope and exited with math they wish they'd done earlier. You can decide to be someone who does that math first. That's not pessimism, that's just clarity. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, subscribing is the only thing I'd ask. No pressure. See you in the next one.